welcome to this, our virtual newsroom visit. And it's part of our global newsroom visit series where we drop into members' newsrooms around the world. And it's about how we share some of the wisdom, let the wisdom flow, if you like, between countries and continents and newsrooms across the IPI Global Network. And what a visit this one is. We're covering a whole continent in one go. And just like the newsroom we're visiting, which is Africa's the continent. And I know, like, I've had this in mind for a long time to visit the continent newsroom, ever since I got to know Simon first, and then Sipho, and of course now Kiri, to really, when learnt about the kind of experimentation that you guys were doing, with the journalism, with the formats, and with distribution, and how you were thinking about the audience. So I'm really excited that we're able to drop in today and get you to share some of that. For those of you new to IPI, I don't think anybody is, but possibly. We're the global network of editors, publishers, and journalists for press freedom and independent journalism. I'm Jackie Park. I'm IPI's Head of Innovation and Network Strategy, and I'm going to introduce the session today and a very light touch moderation. So The Continent is a weekly newspaper produced by African reporters, photographers, illustrators, and editors for and about Africa. There's a real cleverness to the meshing of the design and the distribution, shaped in a medium is the message kind of way for social messaging platforms. And we have the force behind The Continent with us today to take us through the newsroom and and tell us a bit about how they started, the product, the journalism, and of course what's next. So we have Editor-in-Chief Simon Allison with us. We have Editorial Director Sipho Kings, and we have the Communities Editor Kiri Rupiah. And just before I hand over, just a little bit about how it will work. So it'll run for about an hour, possibly up to 70 minutes. There'll be some short presentations from Simon, Sipho, and Kiri, first of all, for about the first 20 minutes or so. Then it's over to you and to ask questions and to take the conversation, where the interest lies. If you can have your videos on, that would be much better. I understand connectivity might be an issue, but if it's not, please keep your videos on, because imagine here we are in their newsroom visiting, having a coffee, having a conversation about how it all works. For questions, once we get through the presentations, although if you have a question, a burning kind of question, I'm sure none of our hosts will mind if you interrupt and ask that question. But otherwise, once we're done, I guess if you can just pop your hand up, that would be great, and then we'll get to you and you can ask the question, or post your comment live. And that's about it. I think I'm going to hand over first of all to Simon. Thank you so much for taking the time and welcoming us this morning. Or this morning your time, this evening my time.
Good morning, everyone. It is a lovely summer's morning in Johannesburg, where I am speaking to you from. Thank you to IPI for the invitation to chat about the continent and what we do. We are very privileged to be here. The IPI has been a wonderful supporter of the work that we have been doing. At last year's Congress, we were able to present some of the progress we'd made, and that was a real honor as well. So yeah, we're thrilled to be here this morning, and we just wanted to share a little bit about the continent's journey, how we sort of came to be, how we have progressed in the last couple of years, and then what the future might look like. So that is kind of what we're going to discuss. I'm going to start with how we came to into existence, and I want you all to cast your minds back 2 and a bit years to the dark days of March and April 2020. The pandemic was very new on all of our radars. We didn't really understand what COVID was or what it was going to do to our societies. Everyone was really scared and really confused. And I remember the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, he stood up in March 2020, and he gave a speech and he said, the world is facing not one, but 2 crises. The first is the pandemic, COVID-19. We know all about that. But the second is the infodemic. And an infodemic, as you're all well aware, is when we are so overwhelmed with information that we lose the ability to differentiate between information we can trust and information that we can't trust. And in the context of public health, this is a huge problem because who are you going to take advice from? And of course, we have seen the very real world impact of this in the rise of the anti-vax movement, for example, in the spread of fake news related to COVID and potential cures like steam inhalation and hydrochloric, I can't pronounce that word, but the one that Trump likes. So we were sort of grappling as journalists with how do we respond to this? We can't do anything about the pandemic. We're not public health specialists. We're not doctors, but we are information specialists. That fundamentally is what a journalist is it someone who is trained to process large amounts of information, to filter what is accurate and what is not, and then to present that information in a way that makes sense to our audience. At the same time, as journalists, we got our friends and family coming up to us all the time and saying, hey, I got this bit of news. Is this real? Can you confirm it for me? You know, does steam inhalation cure COVID? Is this all a plot by Bill Gates to mind control the world, et cetera, et cetera? You know, these incredible claims that were spreading like wildfire at the time. And a lot of our friends and family saw them, read them, and didn't know what to make of them. So they came to us as journalists. And almost universally, we were able to say, no, that is definitely not true. Bill Gates has many things, but I don't think he is trying to control your brain with a virus. But then we asked a follow-up question. And that question was, where did you get this information from? And in South Africa and across the African continent more generally, the answer is almost always the same: WhatsApp. Now, WhatsApp is probably the single most powerful social media network that has ever been invented. I believe it's more powerful than Facebook or Twitter because it is designed as a platform to communicate with friends and family. It is private, and people in private tend to be more honest, more open, and more trusting than they are in a public facing sphere. So we thought, wow, if fake news can proliferate on WhatsApp, what's stopping real news from doing the same? And so we started looking into it. And one of our inspirations actually is currently on this call, Nigel Mugamu. And once we've spoken, we would love to ask Nigel for his thoughts on this. So Nigel really pioneered the WhatsApp newspaper. And yeah, Nigel, please tell us a little bit about how you did that. So he started to release a newspaper that looked and felt like a traditional newspaper, but it was designed for WhatsApp and distributed via WhatsApp. And we thought this was absolutely brilliant. At the same time, one of South Africa's most prestigious newspapers, the Sunday Times, they had their entire edition leaked online in about March 2020. And it was leaked as a PDF. And I cannot tell you how many people sent me a copy of the Sunday Times and said, oh, have you read the Sunday Times? Have you seen that their edition got leaked? And I'm pretty sure that was the most read ever edition of the Sunday Times, simply because of how powerful WhatsApp is as a platform. So we thought, okay, why don't we try and create a newspaper that is designed to be read and shared on WhatsApp. And the audience that we were targeting is one that we felt was left out of a lot of international coverage. And that is a sort of global, Pan-African audience. What tends to happen is in a lot of African countries, and South Africa is a fantastic example of this, is there is a lot of really good journalism that happens about local news and national news. But the costs and the complexity of covering news beyond your borders means that most South African newspapers, in fact, all of them at the moment, do not have any form of foreign correspondence. So they rely entirely on the wires, AFP, Reuters, sometimes the BBC, to fill the pages of those newspapers with what's happening in Africa and the rest of the world. Now, what that means in practice is you've got an editor sitting in London, perhaps, with a European or Western audience in mind, making decisions about what stories are and are not important, which is fine. They're doing their job. But when that is then filtering down to an African audience, often those stories lack vital context. Often they are they take an angle that would be different for an African audience. Or they just don't cover issues that are relevant to an African audience, but perhaps not a broader international audience. So that was the gap that we wanted to fill, and we came up with this idea to launch a Pan-African newspaper on WhatsApp. We spent 2 weeks putting it together. So we had the idea, I think, at the end of March 2020, and we launched our first edition on the 18th of April 2020. It was a mad rush. We had no idea if it was going to work. We had no money behind it whatsoever, except a lot of really good journalists who were willing to invest their time and their passion into journalism, into trying something new. And we produced the first edition. And I will never forget that night. We sent it out. It was a Friday night or early Saturday morning. And we sent that edition out to our friends and families. This was 4 or 5 of us, and we just sent it to our networks on WhatsApp. And we said, hey, if you like this, if you want more of it, could you share it with your friends and family? And if you want to see it again, just drop us a message on this number, and we will then send you next week's edition. And by the end of that first week, we had 1,000 subscribers. And that was the moment where we realized that there was an audience that needed this news, that wanted this news, and that this particular distribution mechanism was really, really effective for delivering it. We've learned a few lessons along the way, particularly when it comes to how we produce this newspaper. There was a time where I wore 2 hats. I was the Africa editor for the Mail and Guardian newspaper in South Africa, and I was editing the Continent. And we'd get a story in at, say, 1,200 words, which is a perfect word count for 1 full page of a traditional newspaper with a nice picture. And I'd edit it and I'd publish it in the Mail and Guardian. And then I'd come to the Continent. And a full page on the Continent is 300 words. And that's because we have to make it readable on a smartphone. And we are also competing with Twitter, with Instagram, with Facebook for people's attention, which means things need to be sharper and snappier. And we would then take that 1,200 word story and run it at 300 words, which is a lot of heavy lifting in the editing department. But what we came to realize was all that hard work that we did actually paid off, because those 300 word stories, if they're edited well, have almost as much information and a narrative and quotes as a 1,200 word story. And what we've done is we have saved the reader 75% of the time that they would have spent reading that 1,200 word story. Because when we talk about readers not paying for news, maybe they don't pay in money, but they do pay in time. And if we can save readers time, then we're saving them money, and we're providing a very real service. So we've had to change the way that we sort of approach news, the length of stories, how we present those stories. And that is continuing to evolve as we develop our product more and more. But really the secret to to what we have been able to achieve lies in the distribution mechanism. How we are able to get this digital newspaper out to, I think we now have subscribers in 110 different countries around the world, including one in Kazakhstan. I would love to know who is reading The Continent in Kazakhstan. But to guide you through our distribution process and how we've done this, I'm going to ask Kiri to do that. She is the brains behind it, and really came up with the strategy for how we reach people on WhatsApp. So Kiri, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kiri Rupiah. I am the communities editor and the head of distribution at The Continent. Can everyone hear me properly? Yes, everyone can hear me. Great. So as Simon explained, right at the beginning of most of the global lockdowns around March 2020, March 2020, we had this problem where we were getting news or information from relatives and colleagues and people asking in general, hey, is this true? Hey, did you read this thing? Have you seen this thing? And a lot of the stuff that we were getting that untrue was coming from WhatsApp. Now, I'm not sure if WhatsApp is as big in the rest of the world as it is in most of the global south, but that is the primary means of communication for a lot of people in the global south. So this is not just a platform for people to talk to family and friends. This is also a platform for you to get information from colleagues and a lot of people, I think maybe judging from like India is also where they get like a lot of their news. So instead of doing the same thing that a lot of, what I find to be a mistake, that a lot of newsrooms across the world do, where they build a thing and then they ask their readers to come to them. What we decided to do was to go where our readers were, right? For years, we've been doing, journalists have been doing a pivot to video, pivot to audio, paywalls, gamifying, all sorts of things, but they've not really focused on going to where their readers are. And we thought, well, look, this is the biggest platform for people to receive their news and for people to talk to people that they trust. Why not go there and work from there? And so that's how we figured out we should use WhatsApp. And as we've grown, we've gotten onto other platforms. So we're not just on WhatsApp, we're on Telegram, we're also on Signal, because a lot of people, as time has gone on and as WhatsApp has had little outages and a change of ownership, some people have decided, well, you know what, I don't feel very safe on WhatsApp. Yeah, you might tell me that it's a closed network, but I would prefer to get my news on Signal, right? Other people are like, listen, I get a lot of my news from Telegram. So we left and we joined Telegram, and that's been growing quite steadily. About the way we publish, we do have a website, but it's more of an archive of the work that we've done rather than the primary source of where we put our news. There for you to go check out the website and read all the publications, and that's very important in that, is asking people to visit one of these websites and using their phone data, and asking them to go above and beyond to just read your publication. What would make us so special? So we make it as easy as possible for people to spend their time and their data on our work. And as Simon explained, this is an attention economy. You can't be putting out 1,200 word news reports. So we try to keep it as short, as sweet, and as informative as possible without exhausting our readers. And yeah, that's it really.
Thank you, Kiri. Good morning, everyone. So money, how do we pay for all this stuff? And the very beginning, as Simon said, there was a lot of volunteering. At a point, Simon's mother was proofreading and checking the content. And all of us have had like family members and partners, especially doing the proofreading, because we publish late on a Friday, so we're very tired and half asleep. So extra volunteer eyes really do help. We have been very lucky because we are a small newsroom and we're at a distance. We don't have sort of rent and office costs. So we've been able to get along with donor funding, which is the majority of our money. We are fiscally hosted. So we have a unit called the Adamella Trust in South Africa, which was created by journalists from the Mail and Guardian 12 years ago. And it is an NGO, so all of our donor funding goes into that, and then that goes to support our operations. And on one hand, this is really good because in South Africa, there are excellent media laws. It's very hard to sue journalists for doing their work or sue them successfully for doing their work. On the other hand, because South Africa is a hotspot of dodgy financing for terrorists and other people, it's very hard to pay people across the African continent. So that's a huge problem for us being based in South Africa, paying all our freelancers and everyone else who works for us. But it works at the moment. So the majority of our money is from donor funding. That looks like it's set to continue into the future. At the moment, quite a few of the big NGOs are pivoting to the Global South. So we should be fine. We should be able to grow sustainably into the future. We have run advertising because it is a 30-page PDF. We have run adverts like you would in a newspaper back in the day. And we've had a major bank carry out an advertising campaign and other people are interested. The only thing we don't do, or we've committed to not doing for advertising, is anything that deceives our readers. So native adverts or anything like that, because our audience is so valuable to us. Where else? Those are our two main sources of revenue. We are looking at things like events and all of that, but because we're such a tiny team, what are we? We're 4 full-time and 5 part-time people on the payroll. We don't have capacity to do everything. Otherwise, we'd implode. We have asked our readers for money. So last year around Christmas, we said, it's Christmas time. Everyone's giving money to different things. Let's see what our readers would hand over. And that was successful. It was quite a small amount of money that we raised. And to us, because we're constantly experimenting, trying to learn what we can do and what we can get from our audience and how that relationship works, it was a confirmation that we don't want to pursue reader revenue, at least in the short to medium term, because it is so much work to get money from people, either through subscriptions or through support, whichever model you go with. And it also fundamentally changes your relationship with the audience. Like Simon said earlier, people are giving their time, right? People's time is really valuable. So we're happy that people give their time and also share the newspaper with people that they know. And for us, that's enough of like a support costs for the continent. So we're not going to look at reader revenue for the time being. We're just going to focus on philanthropy and advertising. What else are we interested in? Looking after ourselves is something we haven't talked about. So when we started the content, it was the COVID pandemic, which is overwhelming and exhausting and all of the things. And most of us got COVID and you're trying to be alive and all the other things. So one of the things we have done is divide the content into seasons. So like an old school Netflix documentary series. So we have 40 editions in a year, broken up into 4 seasons of about 10 editions. So what this means is we make a newspaper for 10 weeks, and then we have a 2 to 3 break in between. So sometimes we just shut down because everyone's exhausted and you can read it in the room. We're like, let's take a breather. Then the other times what we do is use that as a space to think about the future of the continent. So our last break 5 weeks ago, we had sprint sessions where we looked at all the things we hadn't made decisions about. And we used the time where we would be making a newspaper to decide what we wanted to do in the future. We didn't answer all the questions, but we did really help ourselves. And it helps ahead of each season to think of new sections we might want, or how we want to approach funders, or any of those kind of questions. So we found that really helped in just giving the team time to breathe, survive. What else would people want to know? Diversity, that's something we should talk about. So one of the things that we have started as a newsroom is trying to equalize the mix of male and female reporters across the African continent, and just of anyone who wants to contribute to the newspaper. Because there is a particular problem in media, and this is a global thing, where the people who would approach us as contributors would tend to be men. And also a lot of men from outside the continent who, find journalism in Africa and then want to tell stories. And we've made a real push to try and force ourselves to have more people do journalism for us. And that's also like the picture that was at the beginning of the presentation of our own newsroom. One of our commitments to readers is also to diversify the newsroom, because far too many newsrooms in the African continent are run by white men who have no plan to change how their newsroom looks or who reports to it or any of that, which is something we've committed to do, and it's a really difficult but interesting task. That's it. Let's see what other questions we have as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's so much there. So anyone who wants to dive in and ask a question, Prane, we have our new executive director with us this morning, I should say. Prane, go ahead.
Thanks, Jackie, and thank you very much, Simon, Sipho, and Kiri, for explaining to us how you work, how you function. I can tell immediately I'm one of your subscribers, so I'm one of those numbers that you have from Austria, and I find your newspaper extremely interesting, the approach, the distribution model, and it was really great to hear how you started and how you developed. And I think that's fantastic to see how the different platforms can be leveraged in order to find your audience. And you said across the world from Kazakhstan onwards. For me, one of the things that I would find maybe interesting is on the more sort of social interactive side of a virtual newsroom. I think we've all been struggling through the COVID pandemic in terms of how do we work and how do we function. And I think one of the positive things has been this development and understanding that, yes, we can function online. The technology has enabled us to work and virtually meet as we are today. I'm in Vienna, Sydney, Johannesburg, amongst the places that I can see. But how do you function in terms of sort of networking with other people, with other potential contributors, with people who you want to work with? How do you develop a team, a spirit in your newsroom? How do you replace the sort of something that has, at least I haven't found the possibility, this kind of, what's called a water cooler chat, where you just bump into somebody in the office and say, oh, by the way, I was just thinking about this, and so on. These are the things that I think, at least I've been struggling in the past couple of years, and I would just be interested if you've developed any ways of dealing with that.
Frana, that's a really good question. And to be honest, we don't have a good answer for you. This is my first job as an editor-in-chief. It's the first time I've managed a newsroom. And to do so entirely virtually is something that I have struggled with. If you want to give feedback to somebody about a story they've edited, if you're sitting next to each other, you can just say, hey, think about this headline. But if you have to then send an email and say, oh, I didn't like that headline, and think of a new one, it's so much more weighty and sounds more serious. And so what tended to happen in the beginning was that we didn't give much feedback, and we just kind of dealt with everything that arose, and that was not a good strategy. And so now we are sort of trying, as the team has grown in the last 3 to 6 months, which has given us a little bit more time to start thinking about how we give feedback and how we meet together. But the honest answer is that I don't think an entirely virtual newsroom works in the long run. Yes, it has worked now, and it's worked in these really strange COVID conditions. You know, we've launched the continent, and in some ways this was a blessing. When everyone was in lockdown, no one had anywhere to go. No one had Friday night plans. There literally was nothing else to do except work and watch Netflix. And so people worked and watched Netflix. And that was great in terms of launching a newspaper, not in terms of mental health or any of those things. Now, life has restarted. And you can see that all of us would much rather be doing other things on a Friday night. And we have other demands on our time. And that sort of singular focus, which allowed the continent to be born, I don't think any of us have it, nor do I think we should have it. You know, I don't think it's healthy for us to be driven by one, single thing. So going forward, we are exploring ways in which we can have some kind of half and half. So perhaps that would be an office in Joburg. And what we do is that we bring our team to that office once or twice a year so that we all at least get to meet and spend a bit of time together. And then we can go back and do the virtual thing. But that physical connection is actually irreplaceable, or at least we have not found a way to replace it. And so going forward, we are actually looking to go back and figure out, how we can get the team together in person.
Thank you, Simon. I mean, I have the same feeling that there are certain things that technology has not been able, and that is this personal touch, personal contact. And I do hope that we will meet in person at some point all together. So thank you very much. And I see the other hands raised. And just to know that I will have to drop off at 10 o'clock to for another meeting, but thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Brenny. Branislav, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to say that it's a very interesting idea to promote or to spread the news with WhatsApp and to make something like this kind of very short content to save the time of the people. And I also like this idea that actually this we also realize in Slovakia that this disinformation scene is very strong, and we take it as an opportunity to be the relevant publisher, the most relevant if possible. The only thing I'm asking myself is like how do you want to make money to survive long term, because I don't know that I'm not so sure that you can rely only on funding from some NGOs. Yes, you said you have some bank, maybe some in some countries where the people have or the companies have money and there is a lot of funding is possible. I don't see it happening in Slovakia. So we must have clients who like brands. Yes, who we sell some media space to be able to operate. So I would like to ask you, how are you thinking about making money from advertisement? You said you have one partner, one bank. So how do you work together? Yes, and I don't want to ask the fee. Yes, I think I'm not so sure it's appropriate, but I'm curious to know as much as possible about how you are thinking to commercialize this. To be able to run your business long term and to be independent. Thank you.
And
last question. Sorry, last question. You said that you make it in PDF, like 30 pages. This is how you publish it. I didn't catch properly. This is the last question. Thank you.
Yeah, Branislav, just briefly, where are you from? Which
I'm from Slovakia. I'm from Slovakia, and I'm running the media house that has around 2 million visits per month. Yes, we also have newspaper. We also take the news from AP and Reuters and sell them to another news. So we are like quite a well-known media company in Slovakia. And what we realize when it comes to this disinformation scene, that we started to make some specialized websites. They don't have high attendance, maybe 1 or 200,000 visits per month. Yes, these websites, but they are specialized and they are very relevant about energy market, food market and stuff. And we also have a newspaper, not so big, maybe 5 or 600,000 visits per month. This the newspaper for general population, and our target group are educated people, mainly 40 plus, 35, 40 plus, not much young generation.
Great.
Yes,
Thank you.
Slovak News Agency is called, if you will be searching for it.
Okay, terrific. Thanks. Sipho,
you.
or you? Yeah.
I'll take it. Thank you, Branislav. This is one of the reasons we could found the continent is, as journalists, all of us are obsessed with these questions. Like, it's what we talk about in our free time to a very unhealthy manner. So when we first thought about an African publication, we did dream of having it as a commercial venture, because we were thinking, if you could crack a for-profit newsroom on the African continent, like, you've done it. That's the dream. You could then walk away and retire. But we had funding, so we went down the philanthropy route. We do think, because big funders, so OSF, Luminate, those level of funders are putting a lot of focus into the global south. We think we have, at least in the short to medium term, so the next 5 years at least, our funding will be fine. Those agencies need places to put funding. And when it comes to covering the entire African continent, there's very little competition. There's lots of newspapers in countries, and even then those are shrinking because of the economy and politics and everything else. So yes, we think we'll have a really good period of time, up to a decade, of just, we have money, we can experiment with different ideas, so like podcasts or events, to try it out. That said, we would like to bring the proportion of philanthropic money down to, let's say, half or less. So when it comes to advertising, there are a few really big companies, so like banks, that cover the entire African continent. So the big advertisers there are banks and cell phone companies who operate across the whole of Africa. And this is a market with 1.2 billion people. So we are lucky that there's a lot of money for that market and for customers that have money. So we should be able to run advertising. One thing, as you asked, because the PDF is about 30 pages and it's 300 words on a page, so it's quite a small piece of real estate, and it is just 30 pages. So we don't want a lot of adverts. So it's not a lot of space to monetize each week, right? Unless we create like an edition that's in French or in different languages. So create more products. But at the moment, for the English language PDF, if you ran one advert a week, we think we could raise, I don't know, $20,000 or $30,000 from that. Very conservatively, which isn't enough to run the newsroom, but it will really help. And the problem we have with funders is funders will give you money for specific programs. They'll give you for your news editor or for reporting on topics. You don't get money to, bring the team together to meet each other in Johannesburg. So advertising gives you that kind of money. So money you can do anything with. So at the moment, that's what we're looking at advertising for, just for flexible money. But we do hope that by the end of a decade of the continent, we'll be really set. We'll have a big newsroom and we'll be able to have events and more advertising. So just extend the revenue stream. Probably never get rid of philanthropic revenue. Yeah.
Are you thinking about events?
So we Yes, so we've partnered with a group in Nairobi in Kenya as a test case. So we're helping to create the Africa Media Festival next February on Valentine's Day, because the African continent doesn't have media festivals for journalism, like general journalism. There's investigative journalism conferences, and there's festivals in countries for that country. But things like Perusia don't exist, and a lot of African journalists can't get to those. So we're helping to create that, and that seems like a really good opportunity, and we can create more of those. And because we're operating across the whole continent, there are a lot of opportunities, but that's not our skill set, so we can't do it right now at scale, and it's something we have to learn as we go along.
Albert, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, thanks so much, Allison and team. So I'm so interested with the internal business of producing the news. So I really want to know like how the mentoring process goes, like when your correspondents have got maybe how do they pitch the story to you as editors? How do you mentor that particular story to the process in which now we have got the final version out? So I'm assuming that if you treat it as a newsroom, you have got an editorial policy, you have got an editorial system, how it runs and so forth, and what the do's and don'ts. Like how does it work, like when you wake up like on a week for a particular story to start, like from an idea until we have got a publication that comes out in your edition? And secondly, since you always publish on Fridays, how are you handling like those speed stories, like those stories that are just breaking up? Do you just wait until the publication day, or do you do something with your online platforms just to make sure that you don't leave your audience behind in terms of those breaking stories? Thank you.
Hi, Albert.
Again,
Great questions.
Oh, you know each other, right? Obviously, Albert. But just quickly about yourself, just very briefly.
Okay. So my name is Albert Shara, and I'm from Malawi. I'm an African journalist, but currently I'm based at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I'm a journalism researcher and also a journalist.
Thank you.
So Albert, to start with your second question, like what happens with breaking news? The Queen of England, of the UK, died at a very inconvenient time for us. It was a Thursday night, and we put the paper to bed on a Friday evening. And it goes out to most of our subscribers on a Saturday morning. Now, Thursday night, it was a huge international story, obviously, but it wasn't really long enough for us to commission anything interesting or original or unique about the Queen's death. But it was enough time that we definitely had to have it in the paper somehow. So that was a particularly tricky challenge for us. So what we ended up doing was running a short news piece about it, but then asking our readers for their reflections, which we then published in the next week. And that turned out to be a very successful way of handling that particular issue. In terms of newsroom guidelines and policies and how we handle things, we are actually playing catch up. We started just using our networks of journalists that we knew and journalists that they knew, and asking, friends of friends to send us stories. And as we've got bigger, we've started working with more and more people. I think at last count, we have worked with something like 330 different illustrators, photographers, reporters across the African continent. And we pay everybody that we work with. We think that's really important. So we are catching up. We have recently overhauled our pitching process so that there is a single place for all pitches to go to that we can then assess on a Tuesday and then publish the story on a Friday. We work with journalists. Some are very experienced, some are very inexperienced, and those require very different levels of editorial input. I think the one thing that we do differently from a lot of other publications, certainly in South Africa, is we provide a lot of sort of editorial support for stories. So, you know, if you were to write a story for the New York Times, it'll go through 3 or 4 different editors before it ends up on page. In most South African newsrooms, you're lucky if it goes through a single proofreader. A lot of stories just get written by the journalist and then get published with very minimal oversight. And that is a function of newsrooms that are underfunded and who have cut that copy editing process. So we have taken the opposite approach, where if you write a story for us, it will go through 3 editors. And we will do a lot of our own fact checking, a lot of often additional reporting, and quite often a lot of rewriting of stories, because a lot of the journalists we work with, they may be very good reporters, but they may not be good writers, or English may not be their first language. That's fine. We can handle the writing if you can do the reporting. And so we provide a lot of that kind of support. So by the time the story is published, it is in really, really good shape. And that is the kind of service that most Western publications are able to give to their journalists. And I think that it's something that more African newsrooms need to invest in.
Kiri, go ahead, Kiri.
I think I'd like to give a response to Albert specifically about the breaking news situation. I don't think we are playing catch up as much as we are doing slow news, right? The nature of our weekly publication means that by the time you know, everyone else has finished reporting on the story, we've had a week to really give nuance and complexity and depth to a story, right? Breaking news sometimes doesn't give you that. And breaking news also, it leaves a lot of people out. It leaves a lot of detail out. And so I don't see it as much, I don't see it as catching up as much as being given the time to really do a proper story where people can get the context and understand why the story is important. There's other people that can do breaking news. You have AFP, you have BBC, you have CNN, you have everyone in the world can do breaking news. But a lot of people give stories weight and time and really give it a proper treatment. And I feel like that's what we do. And I think that's why a lot of people are interested in the work that we do. And not just, you know, just give it depth and then just put out like a long form piece and then expect people to get through it. We're giving you the full news, but in less words. And I think that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and you know, to know so clearly that that's your role and that's what you do. And I think, you know, I mean, you're right. So many people are doing breaking news. I have a question for perhaps, well, for all of you, for Sipho. I think, I mean, like, you guys are doing so much that is really groundbreaking, right? Reimagining how you tell a story in 300 words is I think incredible, you know, as you say, while still being able to keep that kind of narrative and to hear the voice, you know, of the people that you're covering in the story. But perhaps the thing that strikes me most is that you've decided to publish in these seasons, because so many small newsrooms really grapple with this, you know, I guess the lack of resources and the lack of time to actually, you know, take the time to think about what they're doing, because, you know, we're always running. We've got this kind of, you know, runway. We're trying to, you know, build our products, build our journalism, build our audience, that, you know. And so I wonder, how did you arrive at that decision, and how does it help you, and what impact does it have? Like, do audiences, are they a bit surprised when it doesn't turn up for weeks? Like, how do you manage that? Because I imagine most newsrooms cannot imagine just saying, you know, we're not publishing now for a few weeks.
It happened at first through sheer exhaustion. I mean, we're still a tiny team. I think there's 4 full-time staff and 5 part-time staff producing what we hope will one day become a competitor to The Economist and the New York Times, and you know, a publication that's punching on that level and, already we're covering 54 countries. So we were finished after our first 20 issues. And I remember thinking, how can we keep this going every week? We're going to die. And then we thought, well, maybe we don't have to keep this going every week. What would happen if we took a break? Would our readers lose interest in us? Would we feel like there's stories that we should have covered that we didn't? Why don't we give it a go and see? And this is one of the nice things about not being a legacy publication that just does things a certain way. We can experiment. And so we experimented and we took a 3-week break. We told our readers, hey, we're really tired. We'll come back in 3 weeks. And Kiri might be able to speak about the response, but overwhelmingly, people were like, hey, we'll miss you, but thanks so much for the hard work and we look forward to when you come back. And my hypothesis is that readers are as exhausted as journalists. And we're actually doing readers a service by not producing news for a few weeks and giving them a break, giving them time to miss us. And then when we come back, it's, oh, look, the continent's back. That's great. And they can engage with us again because they've also had a little rest. And that's kind of the philosophy that we're trying to put into all the products that we produce. If we do have a more functional website or a more extensive website, if we do audio, if we do these things, it's not about getting on that hamster wheel and covering everything and competing with the 24-hour news channels or the big newspapers that are basically a rolling live blog of the whole world. We can't do that. And I'm not sure we're doing our audience any favors by trying. Instead, what we are doing is we're saying, hey, come to us. We will curate the news for you. We will condense it for you in a manageable format. And we're not going to waste your time. And sometimes that includes a holiday.
Kiri, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think to add to what Simon said, as you mentioned, legacy media, they're these unwritten rules. This is how we've always done things. This is how we do things. And if you try to deviate from that, you'd think, I don't know, you'd ask for human sacrifice. But we decided, because we have always been experimental and always willing to open ourselves up to new things, we decided that, look, if we have the ability to talk to our audience, to our readers, let's ask them what they think. All right, we have access to them, they have access to us, and we have a very engaged readership. And so we said to them, look, if we took a break, what would happen, right? The news carries on, right? But at the end of the day, for us to give you quality news from an African perspective, we're gonna need to take breaks. And sometimes those breaks are going to feel like, oh, well, maybe we stayed away for too long and the massive things have happened, but so far we haven't broken anything and people seem understanding. They're quite open to us taking breaks. And yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, great. And I hear that on the plus side, it gives you that time for planning and things. Padma Priya from Suno, India. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Jackie. How are you?
Good.
Thank you, Simon and team, for letting us into your newsroom. It's been really interesting to hear the work that you're doing. Sort of taking off from what Kiri was talking about, engagement with the audience. Could you tell us a bit more? How do you do these reader engagements? Do you have surveys? I mean, how do you do this? Do you have polls? And what are the other ways apart from WhatsApp and Telegram and Signal that you engage with your reader? Do you meet them in person? Just curious.
Kiri, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. So there are a variety of ways that we speak to our readers, but the main one mentioned is surveys. So we were first approached by this bank about, the advertising. We didn't just make this decision to take this advertising on. We actually spoke to our readers and we asked them to, tell us what they think. Should we take money from this bank, and should we take advertising money from this banking group? And we got to hear what people had to say. And it wasn't just in the survey. We also have letters to the editor email where people are quite open about, hey, I didn't like the story, or maybe you guys should have taken this angle on this thing. And not just, we don't just give you a PDF and say to you, read it this week. We also encourage people to give us feedback. Thus far, we've not had an opportunity to meet people, but we're hoping maybe at the media festival in Nairobi in February next year, that we get to speak to not just other journalists and editors, but also to our readership. And yeah, that's how we do it. But yeah, it's always an open door. Speak to us on WhatsApp, Telegram, email, Twitter. And we've realized also that we do not talk to our readers in an adversarial way, which I've noticed a lot of newsrooms do. We ask them, listen, what do you want to see? What do you want to read about? And they give us proper feedback. And I think that's very important. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the time, Kiri, where, because we developed quite a close relationship with some of our readers, and one reader in particular thought he would share his nude pictures with us, which was certainly a challenge for the community engagement team.
Yeah, people are, look, besides just the news and the occasional nude picture, we do have people that also ask us questions in general about, hey, I saw this thing, can you help me figure out if it's true or not? And then we direct them to, let's say, like an Africa Check. Africa Check is a fact-checking organization. And if I can't answer that question, I will direct them to someone who might be able to do that, even if it means directing them to another organization. But also, we have a readership that's open to things, right? It's not just us, speaking to them and telling them this is what we're doing. They also are quite open to letting us know what they think and what we should be doing. And that's helped, that's informed a lot of the way that we do things. Yeah.
Okay, look, that's so interesting. We should probably think about wrapping up now. Any final thoughts or comments from anybody? No, I think then you guys have done a fabulous job taking us through, how it works, how you think about journalism, how you engage with the audience. It's super interesting to hear about your plans, with events, or how you're experimenting with events, how you thought about audience revenue, and I think that's really smart. You've tried, and and that you were able to share that with us, and so many other things. Thank you very much, Simon, Sipho, and Kiri.